Hello and welcome to Agency Office Hours live Q&A to answer your questions about growing your agency more profitably. I'm Karl Sakas, and here's a preview of the questions that I will be answering today. First up, Matt in Indiana has a question about growth strategy. How to know whether to lean in to big growth or not. Then Mary in New Jersey has a question about agency structure, specifically around how to think about business structure, whether you're looking overall or at a department level. Then I'll share how you can get a copy of my forthcoming book, Work Less, Earn More, How to Escape the Daily Grind of Agency Ownership. Then Kevin in Virginia has a question about client delivery, specifically how to approach things if you need to combine account management and project management in a single role. We'll talk about that. And finally, Lily in California has a question around hiring. Specifically, how do you attract more candidates who are qualified during the recruiting process? If you're currently recruiting, you'll especially want to stick around to hear my advice there. If you have a question you'd like to ask and you'd like me to answer in a future event, be sure to include that when you RSVP for Agency Office Hours. We're meeting on just about every second Tuesday here in 2023. You can see all of those available, and my colleague Kate has shared a link live in chat if you're joining us live, or you'll see the link in the description if you're watching the video. As a reminder, everything here is recorded, so if you don't want something to be published, please don't share it out loud. And I look forward to helping everyone out. All right. Well, our first question today is from Matt in Indiana. And he just shared earlier this morning, he had a conflict, something just popped up, but I'm going to answer the question anyway. So to paraphrase, here is the question. Matt asked this. Matt's agency is at a crossroads. He and his business partner are weighing, based on where they are in life, it's going to take a lot of effort to grow their agency. Is it going to be worth it or not? Now, depending on where you are, you may be in a different spot, but at some point you are going to think about, is this worth it or not? And when you get to that point, here's my advice. When you're at a major agency crossroads, consider 3 points in particular. First, what do you want from life in general? Now, I know that's a very broad question. It's pretty existential. But if you're owning a business, your business should be helping you reach your life goals rather than solely your business goals. So what do you want from life in general? And that varies. For some of the clients I work with, the goal is growing their finances so that they can retire early. Others are interested in growing their business to throw off cash to run other businesses that they might be more excited about. For some people, it's grow the agency to do an exit, to maybe stop working for a bit, and to take some time to decide what to do next. They're not exactly sure what they want to do long-term, but in that case, maybe they know they don't want to run their agency forever. On the other hand, I have some people who'll say that, why would they sell their agency? They would just go off and start a new one. So in that case, they might lean more toward the lifestyle side of things. But for instance, do you have kids? Do you want to have kids? How does your agency fit into that from a family perspective? Do you have parents or other relatives who need extra care? Maybe not today, but maybe coming up in the future. Do you have the flexibility you need to help them out? Or is it a case that you need to make money in the business to help them out financially as well? So ultimately, your agency should be serving your personal goals, and it helps to get clear on where you want to go from a personal perspective. If you look in chat for the live event, my colleague Kate has shared a link to my advanced retrospective tool where you can visualize your ideal future and then work backwards. I do one of those every year. Usually looking a year in advance, and then every few years I'm doing further out. So it might be 3 years or 5 years. And at one point, I visualized where did I want to be as of age 90? You don't have to start there, but The main thing is, what do you want from life? And that leads to question number two, which is, can your agency help you get that? Can your agency help you get that? This often comes up as I'm speaking with agency owners around whether to sell or not. And sometimes they've gotten a formal valuation and the number isn't as good as they hoped, or maybe they have a rough idea of their valuation. And the question becomes, sell now for less than they want, or hang in there and keep going. That's question number two. Can your agency help you reach your personal goals? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no, sometimes it depends, which leads to the third question to consider. What would it take to reach your goals through your agency if you're not currently there? For instance, a client had a rough valuation of about $3 million, and based on their goals, they wanted to get the exit valuation to $8 million. They weren't there now. Now, the good news is, based on their trajectory, it wouldn't be terrible to grow. Like, there were a lot of things they'd have to do to make it happen, but notably, they had enough lead time. On the other hand, I sometimes hear from people right before they want to retire, and there's not really enough runway to turn things around in a few months or a year or two. It's really hard to make and implement and then see the impact of major changes in less than a few years if the goal is must have an exit. Keep in mind also, when it comes to exits, that usually there's going to be some sort of an earnout where the acquirer wants you to stick around for a certain period of time to make for a smooth transition, and also that tends to impact how much cash that you're going to get. Like, the business needs to keep performing. It's all negotiable, but for instance, say you want to be out of the agency in a month, and the acquirer, maybe you're happy with the offer overall, but they want you to be there for 2 years. You have to decide, what do you really want? So, when it comes to a major inflection point for your agency where you're realizing it's going to take a lot of work to reach your long-term goals, ask yourself those 3 questions to help you decide what you want to do. Is it going to be worth it? To recap, what do you want from life? Number 2, can your agency help you achieve that? And number 3, if your agency isn't helping you do that now, what would it take to make that all happen? And thank you in chat. I see getting some positive feedback about the advanced retrospective. That is definitely a core part about my Work Less, Earn More bootcamp, which is starting up for the 3rd program tomorrow, in fact, and also in my agency leadership intensive. So would love to hear how you've thought, if you're joining us live, how you think about how to grow your agency and what it would take. Feel free to share in chat. Well, next up, we have a question from Mary about agency structure. So Mary, if you want to unmute yourself and come on video, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Hi, thanks.
So the question you shared, and I'll paraphrase it and then let's dig in and answer the specifics. To paraphrase, you asked, how should agencies think about business structure, both overall and at a department level? If you could, please elaborate, and then let's dig in.
Yeah, definitely. So previous to the role I'm in now, I've been at a couple different agencies and all larger. So as we're growing, we're at my current location and we're evolving and the team's getting bigger, it's natural and easy for me to automatically default to what I've seen in previous agencies, but I don't want to let myself do that. I want to continue to challenge and say, like, is it right? Is it right? And I know there's the standard, you got your account manager, your project manager, and all the, the standard structure that you see at a lot of traditional agencies. Yes. But really the question is, like, how do you challenge that? Or maybe it's great and maybe that's what it needs to be, but what considerations are out there? And then adding on to that, like, leadership team structure too, like variations of that.
So ultimately, thinking about the moving parts, as your agency grows, what is the right structure? Should you use structure that other people are using, or should you create something that's a bit more custom? Well,
Mhm.
let's take a look at some benchmarks and then dig into some next steps, Mary, for your specific situation.
Great.
And so for everyone listening, and my colleague Kate has shared a link in chat about this, there are certain milestones around agency headcount where it makes sense to make changes to your structure. So in the early days, everyone is doing a bit of everything. We could think of this perhaps as the functional structure where someone's doing account management and project management and the subject matter expert work, and they're doing sales and they're doing operations, right? If anyone listening has just started their agency and that's where it is, that's common. And then over time, people start splitting off. Maybe they get someone to do subject matter expert work. Maybe they were doing all of the design, then they hire a freelance designer and maybe a full-time designer, things like that, or a writer or a strategist or what have you. So that tends to grow over time. Now, around 8 to 12 people, agencies ideally are adding some sort of an account management or project management structure or both. That could be having a dedicated account manager. That could be officially saying that someone's job is now, for instance, part copywriter, part project manager, something like that, where you're starting to formalize account management and project management as their own roles, because they are their own roles. And we'll talk a bit more about that later today in the question around what to do when you need to combine AM and PM, account management and project management. So 8 to 12, ideally, you're starting to split up account management so that your subject matter experts can focus on their craft rather than dealing with client inquiries all day long. Then around 15 plus people, it starts making sense to separate sales and marketing for the agency itself. You may not hire a full-time marketer, may not hire a full-time salesperson, but it's time to start thinking about those as dedicated roles. And 2 more breakpoints to consider. Around 25 people, it makes sense to start thinking about directors. 25 people, maybe there's a director of technology or a director of marketing automation services or a director of creative or something like that, where you're starting to split things out. And Mary, to your question about finding unique solutions, pods can be an option as well. We can talk about that. The other major milestone is around 50 people or so, and that's the point where it starts to make sense to have C-level leadership. So having a CEO, a COO, you might have C-level people in other roles, maybe a CMO, maybe a CTO. Now, some of those titles may be sort of an inflated, instead of a VP of marketing, it's the CMO, but they're overseeing like 2 people, right? That's not what a CMO at a Fortune 500 company would do. But, if your agency has 80 people, you could well have 3 marketing people and, sure, give them a CMO title. And you also may have VPs. So there's structure. Maybe you have one person overseeing delivery. Maybe you have it split further. Maybe you have one person, maybe there's a COO and there's a VP of accounts and a VP of project management and a VP of some of your subject matter expert work, things like that. Now, of course, as you do this, you're adding more layers of management that adds more complexity to the business, but it also means that the agency owner and top leaders don't have every single person reporting to them. So that's sort of a snapshot on general breakpoints. Before we jump to talk about pods, Mary, what questions or reactions do you have on that?
It makes sense. I think a challenge to just what you mentioned about like a C-level, like having the title kind of align with the size and the responsibilities and making sure that makes sense. But the breakpoints seem to make sense. The one thing that came to mind as you were talking was we have a combination of full-timers and freelancers. So trying to figure out like where like 15 people, is that like full-time or freelance, or maybe it's just like a blend of the 2 of like maybe like work level or core work hours or something, but it's kind of where my head's at.
So the 15 generally is assuming full-time,
Okay.
but if you have a lot of freelancers who are working part-time, you are increasing the complexity faster than you're increasing the full-time equivalent count. right?
Mhm.
Maybe, say you have 4 freelancers working about 10 hours a week. That's the equivalent to 40 hours a week, so one full-time equivalent, but it's a lot harder to coordinate 4 people than just one.
Mhm.
And so something to consider, and both Mary, for you and for everyone who's listening, there's always an inflection point around when to go from having freelancers do work to hiring someone full time. And
Yep.
some of that depends on your long-term goals. Like if you're like, I don't like having employees and the pressure on payroll and this and that, I prefer a freelancer model, fine, stick with it. But from a profitability standpoint, usually once you get to paying a freelancer 15 to 20 hours a week for a particular type of work, design, development, writing, what have you, it usually makes sense to consider hiring that role full time. Why? Because you're usually paying freelancers about twice per hour what you would pay a full-time employee.
Mhm.
At that point, if you're paying double per hour for half the time, you could pay roughly the same amount, a little bit more, and get them full time and
Yep.
not have to be like, we need you in a client meeting. They're like, well, I got another client that has a meeting at that time, so I can't do that kind of thing. So do consider, as you grow the freelance workload, it may
Yep.
make sense to hire full time.
Great.
So let's take a look at pods, which are a somewhat newer way of structuring things, but ultimately potentially very powerful, but also something you can really get wrong. And I don't want you to get it wrong. So, what to do. So a pod in general is basically an agency within the agency.
Mhm.
It's a self-contained or a semi-self-contained team. There is someone leading the team who might be usually an account manager or a strategist, sometimes a project manager, but more often someone who is fairly client facing. PMs are still client facing, but not as much if there is an account manager. And so the account manager is largely directing things. And then there are going to be other people on the team. And the size of that pod and also the lineup of roles on the pod will depend on what the agency does. For instance, if you do website design and development, maybe there is an account manager, maybe there's a project manager, maybe you have a designer, maybe 2 designers, kind of depends on how many projects they're working on. And then you'll likely have some sort of a lineup of developers. You might have an all-in-one developer. You might split it so that maybe there's a front-end developer and a back-end developer. Maybe you have 2 of one of those and one of the other. Like, you need to decide what works best for you. But ultimately, the goal is that you build a pod, they're a self-contained team, and they work on a single set of clients. So that if your agency is working with a particular client, their work is done solely by the people within their pod. Now, the advantage to that is that clients get the continuity of the same people working on their work all the time. There's also some flexibility. If you're doing projects within a pod, as they start finishing a project, sales wise and resourcing wise, you can give them a new project, right? As they're wrapping up the existing one. Or, you lose an ongoing retainer client, that team likely has capacity within that pod to take on a new one. Now, there are some downsides. There are some downsides to pods. There are some roles that may not fit into a particular pod. For instance, say your agency occasionally does video work, but maybe not all the time. In that case, it probably doesn't make sense to have a full-time videographer. And you could split that potentially. Are they doing all video? Are they a camera operator? Are they an editor? Or are they doing a bit of both? Kind of thing. Are they a video producer? If you don't have enough work to justify full-time in a pod, you can also have an additional team that is sort of overlapping. Maybe you don't do a lot of graphic design in what your agency is doing. Maybe you basically have a floating graphic designer who can help out as needed. Same thing with video. Maybe you don't do a lot of development. Maybe the developer is floating, things like that. So you can have a bit of a matrix of pods and then some people who do it both. The other challenge around pods is that if you lose a major client or lose a couple clients, what do? Right? Those were helping support the finances of the pod. You could have that pod help out other teams, but then you're destroying part of the point of the pod, which is to have people dedicated to a particular client. Ultimately, my view is it is worth exploring pods, but make sure you get the pod right, and make sure in terms of the lineup of people, and also how much in terms of client work you're assigning to them, in terms of number of clients, complexity of clients, and the dollar value of revenue, but also have a plan B in case you lose some of the clients that are in a pod. What kind of temporary balancing are you going to do? Ultimately, though, pods do let you expand the agency faster than if you were trying to do more of a hierarchical structure, right? Where you've got the design team, the dev team, you've got account managers, you've got project managers. That can be a bit more siloed. Pods are a bit more integrated if you get it right. So, Mary, any follow-up questions from what we've covered?
No, that was great. Thank you.
All right. Well, good luck as you're working through that, and let me know how things go.
Thanks.
So coming up next, coming up in a bit, we have taking a further look at the team. Let's take a look here. We have some questions around client delivery, specifically how to approach account management and project management when you've got one person doing both. And finally, we'll look at hiring, including what if you're not getting enough qualified candidates? What can you do? If you're hiring right now, you'll want to stick around for that. But first, a bonus tip from our sponsor. Today's event is sponsored by Sakas and Company. Hi, Karl Sakas here. And in particular, by my upcoming third book, Work Less, Earn More, How to Escape the Daily Grind of Agency Ownership. This is one of the proof copies. The official one won't have a bar across the top there. And I have designed this to help you, well, work less and earn more. It's under 200 pages, so there's enough information, but it won't take you forever to read. You can get it in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle form. And that'll be coming out in January, here in January of 2023. I have some advanced reviews from fellow agency leaders and experts, people like Blair Enns, David C. Baker, Jay Baer, Jenny Dietrich, Tamsin Webster, and others. For instance, here is what Blair Enns said about the book as an advanced reviewer. A creative agency has two stages of success. The initial success derived from hard work, and the more lucrative level of success that is untethered from effort. In Work Less, Earn More, Karl gives you a framework to finally get to the elusive second level. If you're not familiar with Blair, he is the founder of Win Without Pitching and author of books including Pricing Creativity, A Guide to Profitable Beyond the Profit, Beyond the Billable Hour. You might be wondering what is in the book. Well, again, it is step by step. And here's a preview of what the steps are if you're interested. So, within the book, it's begin with the end in mind. Where do you want to go? You'll start by identifying what is your ideal agency, and I'll guide you through a process to help identify that. Then we'll take a look at the 4 stages of day-to-day involvement. Where are you today and where do you want to be in the future? That'll help you figure out how to get there. Then we'll talk about growing your support team, both your existing team and your extended team, to help you get things done. We'll talk about work less. What does work less mean and how can you make it happen? And then earn more, including some benchmarks about how much ideally you would be paying yourself as an agency owner, leader. Then we'll take a look at enlisting your team to help. I'll share 25 growth strategies to help you grow. And then I'll help you narrow the list down to help you create the right combo for you, including turning that into a bite-sized 90-day plan to help you move things forward in the near future toward your long-term goals. We'll talk about creating that plan, creating structure to help hold yourself accountable, as well as enlisting your team to help so that it's not all falling to you. And finally, some inspiration to help you take action. Again, it's less than 200 pages, so it's designed to be something you could read over the course of a weekend or over a few days. There are all kinds of exercises. Thanks to my colleague Kate for helping build out a really in-depth workbook. If you sign up, or if you get the book, you get access to a free workbook that's over 30 pages to help you apply the exercises to make it all happen. So Work Less, Earn More is coming out in January of 2023. If you'd like to find out as soon as it is available, go to worklessearnmorebook.com. That's worklessearnmorebook.com. You can sign up to get notified, and if you're watching this video later, then the book's already out. You can get a couple sample chapters free of charge and see how to get access to the free workbook for Work Less, Earn More. If you have any questions about the book, feel free to share those in chat. And now we're heading over to a question from Kevin. Let me go ahead and bring Kevin in if you want to unmute yourself. Here we go. Kevin, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Thanks, Carl.
So you had shared a question, and then we'll dig deeper. To paraphrase, your question was this, around client delivery. How should we structure a part-time account management and project management role? If you could, please elaborate, and then we'll answer.
Sure. So I'm looking to bring someone in fact, did this past year. In a part-time role, we didn't have capacity at the level to support that role at a full-time level.
Okay.
And framed it in such a way as to have her take on both account management and project management tasks. I think it was a definite learning experience for us over the last 9 months. And just curious as to your thoughts as to how we might set that role up for success in the future, or perhaps position it differently than what we did this past year.
Got it. So ultimately, if you're hiring someone to do both account management and project management, how do you set them up for success? It is a challenging role and it's a challenging combination, but let's look at what you can do. So first, keep in mind, and by the way, for everyone listening, if you are dealing with this yourself, like, this advice applies to you as well. It's hard to find a part-time PM. There are freelance PMs who'll do part-time work, but it can be a challenge. Like, having been a PM, I know that, I'm putting out a lot of fires all day. It's nice to have the stability of a full-time role, right? So that can be a challenge. And it can be even harder to find a part-time account manager, right? Where they're supposed to be dedicated to a particular set of accounts, but it's not their full-time job. So that can be a challenge. The role itself is tough to combine, even if you've got a full-time person who maybe they have an account manager title, but they're also doing project management. Or I've had roles where I was the project manager, but I was also serving as an account manager. It's tough, right? Because generally project management has a particular skill set and orientation about get the work done. What has been sold? Are we getting it done? Rather than necessarily building relationships with clients, or at least in the same way. And then account managers are all about the relationships, right? They're the voice of the client within the agency. They're helping the client get excited about things, but may not always be as focused on what is in scope. What did we actually sell? Have we done everything we said we'd sell? Like, often it can be, chasing after upsells and growth opportunities, which are good, as long as it doesn't happen at the detriment of what you've already sold the client. And of course, that can be a challenge on the PM side, where, ultimately they can miss upsell opportunities because they're so focused on getting the work done. So it's a tough role to combine. As I share in my article on agency roles, and also in dealing with multiple roles where you have someone doing 2 to 3 roles, it's tough. Not impossible. But if you add that, I know you had shared earlier, your hope was that this person could also do other smaller tasks too. What are some examples of the things ideally they would do?
Yeah, I think they would be more back office things like potentially doing some research, helping to set systems up, that sort of thing.
Got it. So in a sense, it would be ideally someone who maybe is leaning, in that case, leaning toward project management, who has an interest in operations, which has been my career path, where, one agency started as the head of client services, realized that I really liked operations, and shifted the role so that there was still some client work, still some project management, but doing more and more internal operations. And same thing in another agency, around project manager to operations manager. With that in mind, for your particular role, Kevin, I would lean towards someone who's probably more project manager, because they're likely to have a stronger interest in operations, rather than seeing that, to generalize, an account manager type person might see operations as the opposite of fun, whereas an operations person loves operations. My joke, having been an operations manager and a director of operations, is operations is everything that has to get done, but that the owner doesn't want to do themselves. So, what do you do? There's that key question about leaning toward account manager or project manager. I think, Kevin, in your case, I would lean more toward project manager, where someone can work with clients, but that they're more interested in coordinating the work, but between the two. But for some people listening, your role, maybe you have a project manager already, but you need someone else to be more client facing. You might lean more toward the account side of things. So, the related piece also, Kevin, as we're thinking through things, if you need someone part-time, do you want someone who is a full-time freelancer, or do you want someone who is working part-time in general, or someone who maybe has a day job and they're helping out for you? For these particular roles, for AM and PM, I would not hire someone who is moonlighting. I think moonlighting generally is fine, right? Give people opportunities, this and that. It's hard to do it for this role, because an AM/PM needs to join meetings, whether that's internally, whether wearing their PM hat, or externally if they're wearing their AM hat. And if they've got a day job, it's going to be hard for them to join those meetings. Now, that can work in other cases. Maybe you've got someone who's doing freelance copywriting. That could happen anytime. Maybe they need to be in some briefing meetings, but it's a bit more independent, rather than they got to be at the meeting kind of thing. So what's your reaction, Kevin, so far about what we've covered?
Well, your very first comment that you led with is that it's hard to do those roles part-time. And I think that even taken individually, both of those roles are challenging to handle on a part-time level. So there's part of me that feels like maybe it would be best to really hold out on hiring for those until we absolutely need to, and until I can support a full-time role. And my inclination is to work more to finding help that can help with back office, business management type things that can alleviate some of the workload from me, while not being time sensitive or needing to be on the clock during normal business hours 100%.
It is worth considering that some of the back office or more back office things could potentially be handled by a virtual assistant, or someone else whose focus is the more administrative side of things, that maybe an account manager isn't going to be excited about, and depending, a PM might or might not. So, in terms of angles to look at, one thing you might consider is, could you find someone part-time freelance who is doing PM and internal operations, where ultimately they're doing more work that is less client-facing than if they were also officially an account manager, but they're still doing the coordination, and they're helping get the admin work off your plate? That might be a potential angle. That it doesn't solve everything, but it would let you get some help sooner. And the fact that they're doing billable project management would also subsidize what you're paying them to do the internal only work. That's something to consider.
Yeah, that feels like a really good direction to move in.
One key thing to keep in mind, well, there are many things to keep in mind, but One to keep in mind would be, what is the skill set you need in terms of the level of skill for that person? So for instance, I've written an article about PM levels. This would be if you're hiring more about a dedicated project manager. Or do you need a project coordinator, a project manager, which is a fairly wide-ranging title, or do you need a director of project management? That answer impacts the right person to hire and getting the role right and things like that. If it's more about, hey, we've got a great account manager, but they need support on details, it makes sense to hire a project coordinator. On the other hand, if you need someone to manage really complex client engagements, that's definitely a project manager. And if you're at the point where you have multiple project managers and need to coordinate all of that, it's probably time for a director. In this particular case, as you're thinking about getting support on internal systems, things like that, keep in mind, and this is true for everyone listening, someone who is skilled enough to build a system tends to be overqualified to run the system. They could run the system, but you're going to be paying them a lot more. And the flip side of that is someone who is skilled to run the system may not be quite skilled enough to build the system. Now, the people who are building systems probably started running the system. They got experience at multiple agencies. You're doing things multiple times. And eventually they've built up their skill set so that they can build the systems. But be careful on that around the person who builds the system may be too expensive to run it. And the person who is running it may not be quite there yet in their career and general experience to build it. So as you're looking to hire, try to sort out, do you need someone to build the system, or is it more about running it? Or do you need someone who's maybe somewhere in the middle, where maybe they know enough to build it, but you're not generally overpaying them? Thoughts about that, Kevin, as you're looking at your specific situation?
Yeah, I think that sounds right. Yeah.
Any follow-up questions from what we've covered before we head over to Lily's question?
Not right now. Thank you.
All right. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us, and let me know how it goes. All right. Next up, we have a question from Lily. Lily, if you want to mute yourself, come on. Welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Thank you so much for having this. I'm learning so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. So, the question you asked was this. I'll paraphrase and then we'll dig in. You asked, when it comes to hiring, how do we attract qualified candidates during the recruiting process? Specifically, how do we get more good applicants per role? If you could, please elaborate, and then we'll dig in on answering your question.
Yes, thank you. I founded Socios PR based in Sacramento, which is a multicultural outreach and communications firm in the capital city. I've been growing. I did not know I was going to have this agency until so many people started coming to me for help. I've had a job posting for the last 6 months, and we've boosted it on maybe the top 5 recruiting apps. And we are getting, me along with my VP of operations, which I just found out today that she's getting overpaid because of this conversation. But anyway, so we're getting applicants from not from the area. I need everybody to be local. And I'm specifically looking for people who are fully bilingual. And I'm getting applications with people that are not bilingual, that are not bicultural. And because our firm is a multicultural communications firm, I need them to have that expertise. So how do I go about doing that without, I want to make sure that I have DEI. So I want to be inclusive to everybody, but I do need to have that nuance. And we're really struggling. I mean, in 6 months, we've had probably 2 kind of qualified candidates, but they want a lot of money that we can't afford.
Got it. So you're not quite at that point yet. So, my colleague Kate and I took a look at the job postings. And so in this conversation, I'll share tips that you and everyone can use, and then we can take a look a bit at the job postings, because looking for ways to optimize things. So 6 months is a long time to have only 2 good applicants. So here are some general things to consider, and then we'll get into the specifics about how do you get more good people to apply for a job. One, are you highlighting what makes your agency unique? If you're people following along in chat for the live event, my colleague Kate has shared my article about small agency recruiting strengths. So, thinking, Lily, to your point about some people want way more money, for sure, there are always going to be companies that will pay more than a smaller agency will pay, but there are also upsides of working at a smaller agency. For instance, they're going to have opportunities to work with you in some capacity, with you as the owner, that they wouldn't get if they were at a 100-person agency, a 5,000-person company, a 100,000-person company. So for some people who are happy to, never talk to executive management, they're not going to be happy at a small agency. On the other hand, if they want that kind of face time, exposure, and learning, small agency is great. There are other things as well around opportunities potentially to get promoted faster because the agency is smaller and growing, rather than this is the way we have done it forever, kind of thing, as someone would get if they joined a company that was, 50 years old or 100 years old. So make sure you're highlighting the benefits of working for your agency as a relatively small agency compared to others that are out there, and also what is unique about your firm specifically. So that's a point to consider. Another is thinking about your current team. If you haven't explicitly asked them to promote the posting as well. Some of them are going to have bigger networks than others and things like that, but are they sharing? Do they know someone who might be interested? A lot of recruiting connections come from so-called weak connections, where people are weak ties. It's not coming from their best friend. It's coming from, meeting someone at the grocery store and you're chatting and you mention you're looking for a new job as an agency account manager. And they're like, oh, my friend Lily is hiring for that. Let me get your email and I'll send you the info, kind of thing. Like, that was someone that they didn't know very well. They know you, but that connection happened, kind of thing. I would also double check what your online footprint looks like. And this is true for everyone. Like, if there are Glassdoor reviews for your agency, what do those say? And Glassdoor is the bane of existence for a lot of business owners. If you have negative reviews, I do recommend constructively responding to them. I had a client who's like, why should I respond? Like, they've made these accusations that aren't true and this and that. And it's like, the response, if you're responding to a negative review, and this is really true for anyone, you're not responding to the original person yet. You're responding, yes, to their review, but really you're responding primarily so that anyone else who sees the review sees that the company took it seriously. And it gives you an opportunity to address things, kind of thing. So basically see, like, what do people say? It sounds like you've already, Lily, posted this to a number of places. You mentioned like 5 or so. Do you recall what are the 5 you've posted to?
Yes, of course. We posted to Indeed. We posted to LinkedIn, Job Recruiter, and the California Board, with California Employment Development Agency, and the PRSA, which is Public Relations Society of America Job Board.
Got it. And the PRSA one, was that for the local chapter in the Sacramento area or the national board? Both. Got it. Okay, so that's good. So, I mean, those are good, in terms of, likely options that make sense. I would identify, are there more niche options as well? For instance, is there, a job board specific to bilingual roles. Like, make sure you're on that. Looking also for other communities. So mentioned PRSA. For instance, I volunteered with the American Marketing Association, AMA, for many years. They'll have their job boards. There are also some agency-specific communities. For instance, the Bureau of Digital, which is a great organization, bureauofdigital.com. You can join as a member. They also have a way to post. They have a job board organized by category. So, for instance, there'll be sections for account management, project management, so on. That could be a way to get it in front of both people who might apply, but it could also help get in front of those weak tie connections where maybe someone isn't looking themselves, but they see the posting and they're like, oh, my brother-in-law is looking for that. Like, let me send that over, kind of thing. So I would definitely look at the community angle. One question related to hiring, Lily, does it sound like they need to physically be in the Sacramento area? Or, okay, so they can't be, say, elsewhere in California or elsewhere in the country or elsewhere. Okay.
Not yet. Yeah, absolutely. They have to be in Sacramento. And you actually bring up a great point, because we had a very awesome candidate, but she was in Colorado and she did not want to move to Sacramento because nobody wants to move to California. Everyone's moving out of this state.
And I mean, that's a challenge in several places, but California definitely is dealing with that. Couple other angles to consider. Are there people who are relocating to the area where maybe they didn't choose to move there, but they're there now? For instance, in academia, people will move to take the job. If they have a spouse or partner, maybe that person is a match where they weren't, maybe they didn't plan to move, but they got the job. So there we go, kind of thing. Or for instance, in medicine, right? If, say, someone is there for their residency, their spouse or partner is along for the ride, maybe they're looking for a job in agency account management and happen to be bilingual. You don't necessarily have to do that as a starting point, but I think given the struggle you're seeing, it's worth reaching out to the HR departments at universities, at medical centers, things like that, around, are they hearing about trailing spouses who are looking for a job and you've got some and would love to hire them, which, by the way, also helps keep the person who had originally moved, helps create some ties for them to stay in the area, because now their spouse or partner has a job in the area too. So, it can be a win-win. And this approach is even more applicable in very, very small markets. I had a client based in a town of 20,000 people, and the same people kept applying over and over again, and made this suggestion about talk to the HR departments at large companies, medical related organizations, and universities. The university angle may be another piece as well. So you're pretty close to UC Davis, correct?
Yes, I'm close to UC Davis, Sac State. Can you hear me? Sorry,
yeah.
my alarms keep going. I'm close to UC Davis, Sac State, University of Stanislaus County. There's a lot of universities. I've already also posted our jobs postings on their universities. Yeah, on their student campus. Yeah.
I would also consider potentially recruiting after recruiting staff members. So for instance, in academia, there are a lot of people working in adjunct jobs where they're, kind of cobbling together freelance roles. Maybe they're a lecturer or instructor where they're on a one-year contract, or maybe even a semesterly contract, and they're looking for more stability. A friend went from working in academia to working in tech and managed to more than triple her salary by changing. So, for instance, there may be some people who are adjuncting, say, in the Spanish department at some of the universities, or perhaps at some of the community college campuses in the area, who are bilingual based on their work, and maybe you're looking for a change in career. Now, you're going to have to teach them about the agency side of things, but that could be an angle to consider.
Great. And if I can ask a follow-up question,
Go
I want
ahead.
to be respectful of your time. What do you think about, on that note, hiring people that don't bring the super expertise that I need so I can be actually working on the business and not in the business?
Yes.
Training up those people, because I do have somebody that is a little bit like, she's worked with a former governor and she is bilingual and she's eager, but she doesn't know PR. So I'm like, ooh, maybe I can coach her, because PR is PR.
Yeah, that sounds like, I mean, sort of if someone has worked for the, former governor, like they have an understanding of high level work, even if they're working on if they're working a smaller angle of things kind of deal. So yeah, I think that's worth exploring. And by the way, for everyone listening, it's like, should you always train someone up? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I think, Lily, to your situation, since it's been a challenge to find people, plan B is train them. There was an interview I saw years ago through the Fog Creek software blog, and one of the things they said was there are two ways to find talent: you can grow it or you can steal it. That inspire people who work somewhere else. So in this case, it sounds like grow may be important. And I know we were looking at your website earlier. There's an account manager role and an account coordinator role. You might not start the new to the industry person as the account manager, but maybe as an account coordinator. And although that is going to take extra time for you and your VP of operations, that may be the direction to go in, or at least for the more junior role.
Okay.
There's one other thing to keep in mind, and you don't have to share the exact numbers out loud, but generally consider framing things around what the compensation looks like. Whether it's describing the exact details or the range or things like that, because sometimes people may not want to apply until they know exactly what it is. And I know, Kate, thinking from your experience, I know you have some things you might add. You changed careers multiple times. What was that like? Any tips you'd add to help Lily and anyone else who is struggling with this?
Yeah, so I went from being a professional ballet dancer, getting injured, going back to school. I took a job at Harvard University in the economics department. And I found Karl on LinkedIn, and I didn't have any agency experience, but I think everything that I've learned from all the various jobs and careers that I've had can easily be applied to what I'm doing now. The interview process was lengthy, and I did a hiring assessment and eventually got hired, but Karl's ramp up plan really helped me grow into this role that I'm in now. So I think even if someone doesn't have a lot of agency experience, they can have a lot of life experience that they can apply to an agency setting. And as long as they have the mindset to continually improve and to continually grow themselves, then they can be a great fit, even if they're new to what you're hoping to have them do.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. So Lily, as we wrap up, any follow-up questions from what we've covered so far?
No, this has been extremely helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us. Please let me know how things go.
Will do.
All right. Well, we are unfortunately just about out of time. I know I did see some additional questions come in via chat. We will not be able to get to them today, but I would love to answer questions in a future agency office hours. If you have questions you'd like me to answer, go ahead and look for the link in chat if you're joining us live, or in the recording, it'll be there in the video description. Include your question when you sign up, and Kate and I will give you a heads up beforehand if you're on the list, and get you in for some pre-consulting through agency office hours. And if you don't have a question, that's okay. You don't have to ask a question to join agency office hours. You can just listen in and hear what other people share. So Thank you so much for joining Agency Office Hours. I'm Karl Sakas. That concludes our Q&A for January 2023, and I look forward to seeing you again in a future Agency Office Hours. Thanks.
Bye, thank you.